Good morning, Dan and Amy, and some breaking news. Trump has imposed sanctions, economic sanctions, on 7 of the oligarchs that form part of Putin's inner circle. So, again, boy, it's an odd strategy by Putin's man in D.C. to be negatively impacting those financiers of Putin and his inner circle of bad actors with big resources. The New York Times begrudgingly, I'm sure, reporting. So there's that. The other breaking news is that 103,000 jobs in March.
103?
I think, didn't ADP have it at 241? I think ADP reported they projected 241. So you just can't trust ADP anymore. And if you can't trust Trump to be the Manchurian candidate for Putin, and if you can't trust ADP on jobs numbers anymore, I mean, I don't know who to trust. Maybe we can still trust Scott the Cow Guy, who joins us now. Scott Shellady, Fox Business contributor. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great lead-in.
Yeah, I figured you'd like that.
It follows you wherever you go, that sound, right?
So what about those numbers, Scott? That's not what we were hoping for.
No, you're right. And the ADP did print a 241 number when we were expecting not quite as much, around 210. So the ADP number was good, and this one was equally as bad. There was a small revision higher. But you know what? Unless it was wildly offside, which would have been, this would have had to have been a negative or something over 400,000, it's still going to be all about the tariff tantrum that was thrown overnight, because that's really what's been moving the market today. And I guess if you watched everything that we watch, everything just blinked an eye at this payroll report.
What about
Didn't do anything.
What about the unemployment rate? Did that stay the same?
It ticked up a little bit to 4.1%. It's still projected at some point in time to get into the mid threes, maybe even low threes. But that hasn't really been a very good indicator over the last 6 or 7 years, because
it's a phony number.
The GDP doesn't reflect the unemployment rate. I mean, if this really is the unemployment rate, then we should have a GDP of over 4, maybe close to 5. I mean, so it's not really. Obviously, I think the unemployment rate's got a lot to do with not part-time, but lower-level jobs rather than proper jobs.
Well, speaking of GDP, Kudlow said the other day that he's still thinking 3-4% GDP growth this year. There's still all kinds of good signs that that businesses are poised to invest and expand and grow the economy.
That would be nice. I mean, lately we've revised it up. The expectation has been revised higher. Fourth quarter has been revised higher. But it still looks as though the average annual run rate is going to be around 2.6, 2.7% when all is said and done. So, yeah, it's still good, but it's still not even at that 3% level. It does take time, obviously, to see these tax cuts kind of go through. And I think with the nerves that are building in the market, as far as what you've seen lately with the stock market since the last couple of weeks of January, maybe it does kind of slow people down a little bit and slow their roll, and they're not quite as willing to spend as they might have been had they been on that sugar high that we had, the end of last year.
Well, do you think President Trump should be a little more responsible with his rhetoric? I mean, yesterday he was in West Virginia and talked about possible tariffs against other countries, and then the Dow dropped 200 points just like that.
Did you just ask me if President Trump should be a little more responsible with his rhetoric?
I am blonde, so talk slowly.
Well, yes, maybe, but I mean, at the end of the day, he's not gonna be. So it doesn't matter what I say. His core loves it, and sometimes the media loves it. I mean, there's a lot of people that, the market's going to react, but slowly but surely, even today, you saw how the market reacted to his overnight comments versus how it reacted to the first tariff tantrum, and it's already been muted. And I'll say this, I said this morning on television, that so far to me it looks a lot like he's playing the economic bully like he played the nuclear bully. He's handling China just like he keeps ratcheting up, just like he kept on ratcheting up with North Korea. And he thinks at some point in time, just like North Korea did, you'll see the Chinese capitulate at some sort, somehow, and it'll all be good. But at the end of the day, the market's really only worried about one thing. It can't stay the same because it's just not fair, but we don't know where we're going. So as long as that's an issue, there's going to be volatility.
Well, going back to Larry Kudlow, I mean, who has probably the most street cred as a growth guy out there, it seemed to me that maybe he had some material role in calming some of the hysteria with respect to trade war talk. by saying, look, this is a growth play. I'm a growth guy. Trump is ultimately a growth guy. Kudlow was careful to say Trump considers himself a free trader. But the thing that Kudlow said that's important is this is a growth play in the short to medium term. What this is standing up to China. The world's behind us. They're bad actors. And ultimately what we're going to get to is reduction of taxes, tariffs, on both sides that are going to be good for both sides. That's where we're going to land.
I don't think that's a difficult thing to buy into. I mean, I do think that the sentiment would be behind the U.S. I mean, at the end of the day, and these are round numbers, and you can dispute them by about 10% either way, but they buy, they buy 150 billion dollars worth of stuff a year off of us, and we buy more than three times that off of them. So if we stop buying, from China and they stop buying from the U.S., who gets hurt more?
Right.
Especially with their economy in the state it's in now. So we definitely have the upper hand there, number one. Number two is that they are in contravention of WTA rules where they are absolutely, the government's giving money to corporations in China to compete directly with U.S. corporations. That's not fair. And then the biggest one, obviously, everybody keeps talking about is the $200 billion to $300 billion a year we lose in intellectual property rights, which is very, very real. And other Western countries have the same problem with China on that one. So there's a lot of people that would line up behind us there. So at the end of the day, I don't understand anybody that can say we shouldn't be doing anything. We should keep it the same. It just doesn't make sense to me. Don't upset the apple cart. Let's let them keep cheating because we don't want to have any volatility. I don't understand that. And I understand the market not liking the fact that we don't know where we're going. But I do believe Larry Kudlow is a free trade guy, and I do believe that Trump believes he is too. Maybe he's not quite that way, but I think that it's not that hard to buy into what Larry was saying because, nobody really does. Here's what I would like. Nobody really wins a trade war, right? Mm-hmm. But somebody loses a lot more than the other guy.
Mm-hmm. And you see
that
happening?
That's where we're at. I think that's where we'd be at. Yeah, I think that's where if we do that, we're going to, nobody wins, but somebody's going to lose a lot more than the other guy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about trade deficits, too, because I've gotten into this discussion, even surprisingly with very sophisticated financial people. And my understanding, which of course is correct, is that trade deficits don't matter. And they certainly don't matter. They're certainly not an indicator of economic performance. In the 70s, trade deficits were nearly zero. The 70s were not the decade that featured the term stagflation wasn't exactly the salad days. In the 80s, trade deficits first boomed, and then they diminished a bit. And obviously, we had the 7 fat years under Reagan. The 90s, trade deficits became large again. We had the tech boom, and the economy grew at a pretty good pace. So give me your perspective on trade deficits, because that's certainly part of the political discourse, and it's something central to what Trump argues.
I hate to say it, but I agree with you 100%.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We can hang up now, right? Yeah, that's it.
That's all I needed, Scott. Was that so hard?
But I also would put in that number, trade deficits don't matter. Neither do retail sales. I hate that number because I don't care how much you sold. I want to know how much you made, right?
Yeah, right.
We should have a retail profits number, not a retail sales number. It's ridiculous. So retail sales is garbage. I agree with you about the trade deficit. Doesn't mean that a lot. There's a lot more out there. I mean, right now, isn't it funny how things become vogue and not out of vogue? Labor force participation rate is probably the most important number out there, but it's really not. It never gets any headline news, and that's the fastest way to turn the economy around is put more people back to work right now, and how many people are actually participating, and we don't really ever talk about it.
I know Stuart Varney pays you a lot of money for this kind of advice, but we're not going to pay you, and you're going to give it to us.
Wow. What about another cow jacket?
Or
getting holes in the elbows.
Or cow swag, one of the two.
Yeah, I've got to go to Omar the tent maker and lay down and have him trace around me.
All right, so if you're advising a up-and-coming nouveau richer like myself, what to do with a little bit of excess disposable income? Do you stay in the market and do you test for the new lows and kind of dollar cost average in at that point, or do you go to cash? Do you pay off debt? What should you do in these volatile times as the market seems like it's just going to kind of stay sideways for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. If you would have bought the high every year since 1929, you'd be a billionaire many times over by now. So as long as we and this is a simple answer that nobody likes to talk about, Dan and Amy, is that as long as we have a growing population, the stock market is going to go up. Because we keep inventing new consumers, right? So you can't. It's very difficult. Look at China.
Well, Amy's
very difficult.
Consumers.
Well, it's very difficult to have your stock market rally and have an expanding economy when you're not having an expanding population. That's the bottom line. So, yeah, you're going to have volatility here. There's going to be better times to get in the market than there are others. But a nouveau riche guy like you, Dan, with so many more years left to live, you don't need to worry about trying to time the market. You just need to be invested at the right time. So if you do get an opportunity to get in at cheaper prices, do it. But don't think that, it can't go lower than what you put in at that moment in time. It will probably go lower. But at the end of the day, over a 10-year period, you're going to do well.
That's good. That's good news and good advice. But I want to be a billionaire now. I don't want to wait 10 years or 90 years.
Well, then you'll have to somehow get involved with scraping, information from Facebook.
Also good advice. I'll have to go to the black market. I got it. All right. He is Scott Shellady, Fox Business contributor. Scott the Cow Guy. Scott, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Have a good weekend, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.